So welcome everyone to the Massachusetts Vulnerable Road Users Law webinar. We have a packed agenda, so we're going to fly right on in, but we are going to talk about the nuances of the bill. We are going to be joined by Senator Will Brownsberger, who was one of the authors and champion of this bill over several sessions, to talk a little bit about some of the legislative process. And then we'll dive into the nuances of this bill. It is a multi-layered bill that impacts literally everybody out there on the roads, whether you're biking, whether you're walking, whether you're driving a truck, whether you're a motorist. Literally anybody who is sharing our public ways should be aware of the changes that are going to be taking place that are coming into effect in early April. We will have room for Q&A towards the end. Though we are packed, we actually got a little more RSVPs than expected. So ideally, we're going to keep the Q&A in the chat and address it at the end, but we will make some space to hear from you. And of course, as always, you can email us at bikeinfo@massbike.org. With that, let me pass it on over to my friend and colleague in the legislature up there, Will Brownsberger, who has been fighting for this bill and many others like it for a long time. Will, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Galen, and thanks to MassBike, you and to MassBike for putting this meeting together, and really thanks to MassBike for your advocacy through the years on this legislation. I'll say my personal stake in this. I mean, I am a cyclist. I'm a commuting cyclist. I've ridden across the country. I ride for recreation. I ride on the roads and off the roads, and so all of this means a lot to me personally. I have friends that have died on the roads. I have friends that have been hit and severely injured on the roads. And I think those of us who take to the roads to cycle have a certain bond, which is formed from the fact that we're out there vulnerable, our bodies unprotected, while there's so many big vehicles out there that have a lot of protection around them and are a danger to us. So the portion of this legislation that speaks to vulnerable road users, it speaks to the idea that you shouldn't get near a vulnerable road user when you're driving a very, a 5,000-pound vehicle. You should give them a wide berth. And that's one idea in this bill. And I think anybody who's been sort of grazed by a moving vehicle, knows how big a deal this is and how important the concept behind this is. The other part of this that means a lot to me is the truck guard bill. As a legislator, I've get invited to all too many of these white ghost bike ceremonies, and it's almost, in so many of them, it's about a large vehicle that couldn't see a cyclist, or a large vehicle that by virtue of its movement sort of moved in a way the cyclist or pedestrian didn't expect. And so the truck side guard legislation and the visibility elements of that are very important. And so I'm looking forward to, Galen will talk about that in more depth. This legislation does go back over 10 years. We passed a set of bike safety legislation in 2008 that addressed a bunch of other issues. And right after that, MassBike was talking about the Vulnerable Road Users Bill in a different form. It was filed by a couple of different people through the years as a standalone. Then we got together with a group of all the safety advocates, Vision Zero and Livable Streets and others, to talk about what our priorities were. And there were three of them. And we sort of divided them into three buckets. One was the cell phone bill, which we did pass. It's illegal to talk on the phone while you're driving now with your phone in your hand. That's a big deal. We all know that's a huge deal. If you look around when you stopped at a stoplight, you look into what's happening in those vehicles. And then the issue of automated enforcement, which is still a to-do item, and this legislation. Those are the three things we put together as an agenda. And I think that was early 2013 that we developed that agenda. And it's taken 10 years to get the first two parts of that addressed. We got cell phone done a little while ago. We got this one done just at the end of last year, and there was the automated enforcement is still out there. Getting to where we are absolutely reflects an enormous amount of collaboration. I happen to be the one speaking today, but the effort that we've made is really one that includes many, many legislators. I want to thank Mike Moran for his leadership in the House, especially most recently. But there are, and the Transportation Committee chairs, Bill Strauss deserves special mention, as well as Brendan Crichton on the Senate. This has been, those are the people that were most involved in carrying this bill across the finish line most recently. But in terms of the consciousness building effort through the years, there are many, many others, individuals and organizations. MassBike has been a leader all through it, but many others as well. And I would be very remiss if I didn't specifically mention the role of MassDOT, the Massachusetts Department of Transportation, because this was worked out. The details of this were worked out in collaboration with them finally. But not only that, they were also leaders along the way in making suggestions consistent with this legislation. So they were big contributors as well to building that level of consciousness and consensus that got this across the finish line. So thank you, Galen, for having me today. And I'll stay on the call and look forward to helping with any questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Senator. It's always an honor to have you, and we're proud for all the collaboration and the leadership in the Senate and the legislature. Can everybody see my screen? Give me a quick thumbs up if that looks okay. Awesome. Cool. As the Senator was saying, there's a lot to this bill, so let's dive right on in. And I should also preface by saying the purpose of this webinar is to inform what the actual definitions and the statute states. What that translates to on the ground is now up to the administration, is now up to individual municipalities, and up to you as advocates, employees, and workers to kind of put this into play. But the point of the legislation is now we have something to work from. The first important thing I'd love to just kind of emphasize, this is not about people on bikes alone. This is about vulnerable road users as a terminology, as a codified phrase within statute that we can now base legislation off of. This is absolutely key because we all know that just because you're on a bike doesn't necessarily mean that you have any special protections out there, even though we are not basically in the protection of airbags, a seatbelt, and a steel cage. So think of all the others who are out there on the roads, people in wheelchairs, people on scooters, people who are walking, people who are fixing their car on the side of the road. We also have included in this legislation horse-drawn carriages and people who are operating farm equipment as well. This creates a special designation that means that if we're going to put in protections, for instance, on marked crossings, we don't necessarily need to have it just be for one user because there is a shared vulnerability out there. And that is a consciousness changing term that I'm excited about as an advocate because I think that aligns MassBike with all of the rest of our Vision Zero Coalition partners, including Walk Boston, Livable Streets Alliance, Transit Matters, Road Safe Alliance, and others, but also those in the accessibility world as well. MassBike is realizing that the work collaboratively is where we're going to make the real change. And so the importance that we are having at MassBike, at least around the vulnerable road users, means that we have work that we can join together to kind of push forward, and we have the definition to back it. So what does this mean practically, besides just the definition? In the statute, now drivers, motorists will have to provide a, quote, safe passing distance of at least 4 feet when passing vulnerable road users. And this is absolutely key because we did not have this before. We had a very vague and amorphous safe passing distance in statute, and it never said safe for whom, never said any way to have enforcement. This is an honest statement that then can be messaged. And I think the Senator and I both agree that the purpose of this part of the statute is not for enforcement. It really is for education. So what we will see is signage that will go up around the state. This is an example of what the DOT is proposing to put out. Motorists must give 4 feet to pass. And we're encouraging anybody who's got a municipality with a sign shop to also start to work with the DOT to craft these signs and put them up on public ways. Obviously, this is not just for cyclists. We did have a little bike symbol on this. A question has popped up about, well, does a pedestrian symbol work for this, or somebody in a wheelchair symbol work for this? That is yet to really be hashed out. But the purpose of the statement here is to say that motorists must give 4 feet to pass is the main underlined point. Also in the statute, it is now clarified that motorists are allowed to cross a double yellow when it is safe to do so, and as long as they are adhering to the roadway speed limit. This has always been a gray area, especially for enforcement officers who are out there. And we all know that cyclists have the right to the road. Vulnerable road users generally have the right to the road, but there isn't always the space to pass within, quote, safe passing distance within a single lane. So this now clarifies that. This also does direct the DOT to work on signage and to put that effort across the Commonwealth, which I've heard back from the DOT, it's still in process. They're working out their plan, but they are well on their way to do so. So if anybody's interested in following up on the signage question, I recommend getting in touch with your local DOT district and getting in touch with your local municipality and putting some of the pieces together. Again, the law doesn't go into effect until the beginning of April. This is going to take some time, but we do expect that we're going to see signs up across the Commonwealth from Pittsfield to Provincetown. And the idea is to change behavior on the roadways. Also, as part of this bill, pertinent to all you cyclists out there, at night, cyclists are now required to have a red rear light as well as a rear reflector. This is a change from the past statute, which said it was a rear light or a rear reflector. Now, there was some hemming and hawing back and forth from MassBike's perspective, at least, around the potential for this to be taken the wrong way, to be used as a pretext for undue enforcement, and for insurance companies to deny claims if somebody did not have lights on. So as part of the negotiations of clarifying, we do obviously support rear lights along with front lights as a way if you're going to be out there on our public ways at night. But included in this bill is the clause that said that police officers cannot use a light violation as a reason to stop a cyclist. It's not what's known as a primary offense. It is an offense, but it can't be a reason for a police officer to pull somebody over. And lack of lights cannot be used as, quote, conclusive evidence of contributory negligence in the case of a civil action. So this was important for the trial lawyers out there and the insurance lawyers out there and the personal injury lawyers out there, as well as police departments. I think personally that this is important for not just public safety in terms of individual cyclists, but this is going to be important for messaging towards bike shops, as well as messaging towards police officers. And the best way to get somebody a light is to give them a light. So I want to also underscore that MassBike does have our Lights Brigade campaign. You're welcome to check it out. You're welcome to donate to it. You're also welcome to sign up as a volunteer. We will send you lights at no cost that you can set up events to go hand out to what we call ninja bikers out there who do not have lights. And we think that that's the most important way to, in the moment, help cyclists become both legal and safer. That's out there. Great. Also, as part of this bill, clarification on how municipalities can lower speed limits and modify roadway designs that are on state-controlled roads. This is important for DCR parkways. This is important for Mass DOT arterials. And this is important when a municipality needs to really think about just the lowering of speeds, but doesn't necessarily have the ability to do so by right. And the clarification is a little wonky for those of you who are out there in municipal service or as part of the MPO process. We can kind of go into that in the Q&A if you're interested. But essentially, the bill states that the state agency has to respond to any request for a speed limit sign, speed limit lowering, or a roadway modification. And if it responds affirmatively, then works with the jurisdiction to actually implement. This is a clarification a little bit of the Chapter 90 conversation, and this also aligns with Mass DOT's Safe Speeds philosophy, which was released last year as part of a wonderful website about how municipalities and other agencies can not just lower speeds, but implement roadway modifications to effectively, by design, lower the speeds of motorists. And I think this is really key. This, to underscore what Senator Brownsberger was mentioning about the collaboration with Mass DOT, I know that this was worked out specifically hand in hand with the offices in both the Transportation Committee and the administration to make sure that there was alignment on both the legislature and the administration. And this is key for any of you in the municipal government. Now you have a way to get the state agency to work with you. The senator also mentioned the truck side guards portion. For those of us in urban areas, and for those of us who have attended ghost bike ceremonies, this is one of the most common. most tragic of crashes that take place out there. The concept is a driver of a truck does not have good visibility when they're out there. They might not have convex mirrors, they might not have backup cameras, and they might not have what are called lateral protection devices known as side guards. I've personally crafted ghost bikes and coordinated ghost bike ceremonies for folks who have been killed in these crashes. And we also know that these crashes are entirely preventable. So this statute requires that any truck that is a class 3 or 10,000 pounds or above that is either owned or contracted with the state will require side guards, convex mirrors, backup cameras. This also prohibits aftermarket additions that prohibit visibility that might make a vulnerable user more endangered on the roadways, including what are known as bull bars or bug shields or any other aftermarket that's added to limit visibility. This is big, and we are the first state to implement this on a state level. This is absolutely crucial. However, this is just for what we have the purview to control, which is state-owned and contracted trucks. And there was a concern around how to implement this more broadly with all CDL and truck drivers that are out there without getting caught up in interstate commerce laws. So I want to make a side tangent here that one of the things that MassBike is advocating for on a federal level is to up-level the lateral protection device requirement from a federal standard so that all trucks throughout the country in all states will also have this similar requirement. It's one of our asks at the League of American Bicyclists National Bike Summit, which is taking place later in March. And this is something that I want you to keep an eye on. If you have connections to the federal conversation, or if you want to get in touch with your congressperson to say that you support this, Massachusetts is a leader in this. I don't know, Will, if you wanted to jump in.
Well, no, yeah, you said it well, but just to add to it a little bit, I mean, I think there is progress that we can make on this within Massachusetts. I mean, we could, for example, legislate that municipal trucks need to do it. We could legislate that trucks, perhaps trucks registered in Massachusetts could do it. But I do think that the requirement for all trucks to contract with the state to do it will have a big impact, because there's most construction companies want to be able to contract with the state. So that will address a lot of construction vehicles. So this is something that's we're going to live into a little bit as we as the RMV goes through the process of flushing this out in regulations. We'll learn a lot, and this is going to be an area for continuing work both in Massachusetts as well as nationally. But this is a big step forward here.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Will. I forgot to also mention, getting down to the local level, we've already seen this implemented in Boston, Cambridge, and Somerville, and probably others that I'm not naming, on the municipally controlled trucks. And I think you can see here, this is a Cambridge trash truck that's being used as the example. So for those of you with municipal connections, it does make sense. And also we're finding that for the large tractor trailers, it's improvement in aerodynamics. So there's actually gas mileage savings as well as preventing the tragedy, of course. So we think that this is a benefit around, all around. And one of the key things I do want to mention as a kind of a side note is that the legislation went through over several sessions, and this component did not get pushback from the trucking agencies. This was not a controversial ask. So I was surprised by this personally. And I think that this is well understood to be a net benefit for all truck drivers, truck companies, as well as vulnerable road users out there. Great. And from an advocate's level, this is one of the pieces that I'm most excited about, frankly, because this standardizes the crash reporting. The statute standardizes the crash reporting that will take place across the Commonwealth. So when a motorist and a vulnerable road user are in a crash, we will have a single portal in order to track these types of crashes. This is key because every municipality has their own type of reporting. There's multiple vendors that aggregate and report out the crash reports from a police standpoint, an EMT standpoint, and a hospital standpoint. And sometimes bicycle crashes are treated as single vehicle crashes. Sometimes they're treated as pedestrian crashes. And there are very rare occasions when folks who are in wheelchairs that are involved in a crash are actually reported properly as well. This is in the works. The DOT, the RMV, and what's known as EOPS, the Executive Office of Public Safety and Security, are charged with figuring this out within a year from the bill going into enacting. So we have about a year while we're waiting to figure out the nuances and the details, but this will be publicly accessible. And I think also an important key component is that there is a requirement to study this law holistically, not just the side guards, the crash reporting, and all of it, the entirety of this bill, where there are any racial, gender, or geographic disparities. And I think that is a key element to add into this, so that not only are we analyzing where the crashes are happening, we can say who is most impacted, and that will influence the work that we do at MassBike, that influence all the work that is done on the Vision Zero Coalition side, as well as future legislation and policies that come out from the administration. I'm very excited about this too, and this is something that we will be reporting on once we actually get the data, which again, will be in the coming years. Great. So it's a lot in a bill. We do have a one-pager that we are crafting that MassBike will share out that has all of these detailed out. It also talks about who we recommend you get in touch with to let know about these changes. Also, you can help us spread the word. There are, I would call it a little tongue-in-cheek, but I would also call it with a little bit of levity. There's something called the noodle rides, that if you're ever so interested in getting out there with a pool noodle strapped to your rear fender to demonstrate in real time, in real life, on the real roads, what a safe passing distance is. I highly recommend that you can kind of organize a ride. Maybe you have a riding club. Maybe you want to do something for Bike Month in May. And I think that's a wonderful opportunity for you to kind of get some notice in a way that's out there that brings the safety factor out into the real world. We also recommend that you get in touch with your municipality in order to install the 4-foot passing signage. Again, the onus is on the DOT to put this on public ways, but they need help. We all need help that's out there. They are going to focus, the DOT is going to focus on the high crash areas. They do have a very effective portal with a map that indicates where the vulnerable road users from the DOT reporting have crash clusters. So they'll be installing signs generally around there, but we all know that pretty much every public way across the Commonwealth could probably use some signage. We also want you to get in touch with your local town planners and your local MPO and regional planning authorities to see where you might be able to request lowering speed limits in your community. Again, this statute does clarify how that can be done, which prevents a little of that kicking of the can where a municipality says, oh, that's a state road and we can't do it. And the state says, oh, it has to come from a municipality first. This is a very clear way which advocates can stand up and make that request. And lastly, we have about 3,000 of these bumper stickers on the way coming to the MassBike office. We have a Google form that we encourage you to fill out if you want us to send you some of these bumper stickers. Maybe you want one, maybe you want 20. You can hand them out, put them on your car, put them on your bike. We would love to have this message shared. The laws that are being changed in April will be written and go into the RMV manual. Of course, that's only for people who are taking the test for the first time in Massachusetts. So the onus to spread the word to every motorist, to every road user is on all of us. MassBike is a relatively small organization that depends on you, depends on the local riders, that depends on the local authorities, that depends on the local leaders. So your help in getting the word out there is going to be absolutely key. And any other ways that you suggest that we participate, shoot us a line, bikeinfo@massbike.org. We're always here for you. We want to connect you with folks who can amplify your voice and your message so that we can actually get this, the changes that we are seeking, the safety that we are seeking, that's out there. And then with that, I will pause for a sec and just kind of mention that the purpose, of course, of this law is to save lives. This is data-driven. We know why crashes are happening out there. We know how to prevent crashes that are happening out there. And this legislation is a firm statement that shares the interests of the advocates, of the legislature, of the policymakers and the administration to keep people from dying on our roads. And that is the whole point of reducing traffic fatalities. It is the most severe and the hardest part of our job here at MassBike. And I know that our allies like Senator Brownsberger and those of the DOT shared this message too. So whatever we can do to continue our work, please, please, please do keep in touch.